Heroes, as we know, are not born. Circumstances forced a 12-year-old boy to grow up quickly when his father suffered a heart attack right on a busy highway. In 2009, young Daniel Marsh and his dad, Bill, were driving when suddenly Bill clutched his chest and slowly leaned back in his seat. He was facing certain death, either from the heart attack or a catastrophic car crash. But as soon as Daniel realized something was wrong with his father, he grabbed the steering wheel and brought the car to a stop on the side of the road. Fortunately, Daniel's presence of mind didn't leave him after that. What would any other child have done in his place? Burst into tears, frantically tried to call their mother, or dialed emergency services? Not Daniel. He continuously pounded on his father's chest, and after 30 seconds, the man regained consciousness. In the blink of an eye, the boy became a hero and a celebrity in his hometown. After receiving an award from the American Red Cross for keeping his composure in such a dire situation and saving his father's life, there wasn't a single newspaper in the country that didn't write about Daniel Marsh. Who could have imagined that just 4 years later, the boy would shock all of America once again? Welcome to Davis, California, a city founded in 1868 and regarded as one of the best places to live in the state. This reputation was one of the reasons Claudia Mumpin, a beloved mother and grandmother, moved there. She devoted much of her time to the local theater and church. Another reason she ended up in Davis was her desire to find love again. Having gone through 2 divorces, she was searching for her soulmate, and she found him at the local church. Claudia met Oliver Northup, affectionately known as Chip, who also had a few marriages behind him. 11 years her senior, Oliver was a successful attorney, a talented musician, and a World War II veteran, making him a beloved and respected member of the community. Both their families were overjoyed when Oliver and Claudia decided to marry in 1996. It was a union filled with happiness. Who could have imagined that Claudia and Oliver would become the victims of a horrific crime in one of California's safest cities? On the night of Saturday, April 13, 2013, the couple said goodnight to each other for the last time. The next morning, they were expected at church, but they never showed up. Their families found this odd. Oliver's daughter tried calling their mobile phones, but both went straight to voicemail. Assuming the elderly couple had simply overslept, their relatives decided to let them be. However, Oliver was a member of a folk music group, and when he didn't show up for rehearsal, his son Robert decided to check on him at home. No one answered the door when he rang the bell. Respecting the couple's privacy, Robert, who had a spare key, chose not to use it. He convinced himself they had simply gone away for a weekend getaway. By evening, Claudia's stepdaughter, Laura, also grew concerned and drove over to the house. She rang the doorbell but had no key with her. After waiting for a few moments, she decided to climb the steps and peer through the windows. As she walked toward the back of the house, she noticed an open window and a cut screen. A chilling sense of dread overcame her. She was now certain something terrible had happened. When Laura looked inside, she saw a horrifying scene she would never forget. She immediately called the police and informed the rest of the family. The residents of Davis were horrified. They couldn't fathom who could commit such a brutal murder of 2 beloved community members, and most importantly, why. Nothing was stolen from the house. There were no signs of a robbery. The perpetrator, or perpetrators, left behind no fingerprints, DNA, shoe prints, or any evidence the police could work with. The crime seemed utterly senseless, which meant that a cold-blooded killer was still at large. While many in the town avoided speaking their fears aloud, everyone silently wondered, who will be next? Investigators hoped that the gruesome injuries and brutal experiments inflicted on the victims would provide clues to the killer's identity, but they were left puzzled, unable to make sense of the horrifying details. If there was a solution to this mystery, it seemed beyond their reach. The FBI flooded the city with agents, but even the Bureau's profilers were stumped. They couldn't determine if the killer had acted alone or had an accomplice. It began to seem as though a perfect crime had been committed. Gradually, investigators started to suspect someone close to Oliver and Claudia. The theory seemed plausible given the unimaginable cruelty of the murders and the use of a knife. Additionally, agents hypothesized that the perpetrator had likely used a key to enter the house and had cut the screen on the window as a diversion to mislead investigators. With suspicion falling on the victim's family, the police began calling in their relatives for questioning, one by one. Detectives methodically interviewed members of the large family, finding no red flags, until they turned their attention to Robert and his teenage sons, Oliver and Tony. On the first day, the 3 were interrogated for 8 hours, and on the next, for 6, sometimes without an attorney present. Exhausted but cooperative, they understood that their father and grandfather, himself a lawyer, would have wanted them to assist the police. All 3 answered questions willingly, confident they had nothing to hide, but naturally the boys were nervous. Oliver in particular struggled due to his schizophrenia. Tony too had reasons to worry. Investigators had discovered a strange drawing by him depicting a man holding a knife, standing over two children sleeping in their beds. The picture was more a silly doodle drawn during a phone call than a sinister fantasy, but detectives latched onto it. Additionally, police learned that on the very day of the murders, Robert had taken carpets to be cleaned. He insisted it was mere coincidence. After all, how could he have known that his father would be murdered the same day he decided to clean his rugs? The entire family rallied around the three men, asserting that their relationships with Oliver and Claudia were excellent and that none of them had ever shown signs of aggression. Robert's family spent thousands of dollars hiring a lawyer for Tony and repairing their home after police searched it and found nothing. Still, the ordeal left deep scars, particularly on Tony, who felt wrongfully accused. Even when all suspicion was cleared, Tony struggled with the judgmental looks of acquaintances and neighbors, who continued to blame him for what had happened to his grandfather. 3 years after the tragic deaths of Oliver and Claudia, the family would suffer another devastating loss. They would lose Tony as well. For 2 months, detectives believed the murder had been committed perfectly. But one evening, everything changed. The police received a phone call. The caller requested to remain anonymous, but later it was revealed that the boy's name was Alvaro Garibay. He was a 17-year-old student at Davis High School and claimed that his best friend had committed the double murder. This information stunned and intrigued the investigators. It didn't match anything they had suspected. When Garibay was asked why he hadn't reported it earlier, he explained that he had feared for his family and his own life. He said Daniel Marsh had told him that he was willing to kill again. The name of the killer was already familiar to the police. It had been in the public eye several years earlier, but not for any criminal activities. On the contrary, the now 15-year-old Daniel Marsh had been considered a hero after saving his father's life, receiving an award from the American Red Cross. Investigators were shocked that anyone would accuse the boy of murder, especially given his heroic actions 4 years earlier. No one had expected that the brutal killer of an elderly couple could be a teenager, certainly not a teenager who had once been hailed as a hero. When the murders occurred, Daniel's father, Bill Marsh, lived nearby, just down the street from his ex-wife and their children. Bill had specifically moved there to be closer to his son and daughter. While interviewing neighbors, the police knocked on Bill's door. Bill, recovering from back surgery, explained that he had just moved in and had not yet met the neighbors. 2 weeks later, he unexpectedly moved out, citing the inability to afford the rent anymore. Neighbors informed the police of Bill's sudden, suspicious move, but detectives didn't pay much attention to it. If not for Alvaro's phone call, the investigators might never have connected Daniel to the crime. Alvaro admitted that his friend had often talked about killing people, but he had never taken him seriously. However, 2 months ago, Daniel not only claimed to have killed the elderly couple, but also invited Alvaro over to his house, where he showed him blood-stained gloves, a jacket, a ski mask, shoes, and a large knife. At that point, Alvaro, still a teenager himself, didn't know what to think. Meanwhile, Daniel had confided in his girlfriend out about the crime, but she didn't believe him, though she was frightened by his behavior. On June 4th, the girlfriend broke up with Daniel, and 2 weeks later, he broke into her house through a doggy door. It's unclear what he might have done if he hadn't been caught. The girlfriend told Alvaro about the incident, and Alvaro shared his suspicions with Bill Marsh, but Bill didn't believe him, or at least pretended not to. In any case, Alvaro felt he had no other choice but to take matters into his own hands and called the police. On June 17, 2013, Daniel Marsh was brought to the police station for questioning. Initially, Daniel appeared completely calm. He denied any involvement in the crime, claiming he was just a teenager who wouldn't harm anyone. However, after 3.5 hours, his composure began to crack. The teenager admitted that he had always felt like an outcast and a loner. Daniel revealed that his mother had left his father for his kindergarten teacher, a decision that deeply affected him. Alvaro had already informed the police that Daniel despised this woman and blamed her for his parents' divorce. He had even confessed to his friend that he wanted to strangle her. Over the years, anger had built up inside him, occasionally erupting in self-harm, as evidenced by scars on his left arm. At just 15 years old, Daniel was willing to go to extreme lengths to feel anything at all. He had even starved himself, leading to a stay in a clinic for anorexia. While he had recovered from the eating disorder, his overwhelming rage persisted. Though Daniel didn't initially admit to the murders of Oliver and Claudia, He revealed a disturbing pattern of thoughts. He described how every time he looked at someone, vivid images of killing them flashed through his mind. When one of the agents asked Daniel how he would kill him, Daniel responded without hesitation. He listed a chilling series of options, such as strangling the agent with his own tie, smashing his head against a mirror, attacking him with a shard of glass once it broke, and finally finishing him off by slamming him into a wall. Then looking the agent in the eye, Daniel added coldly, "Nothing personal." When the agent abruptly asked Daniel when he had started planning the murder of the elderly couple living nearby, the teenager smirked. Realizing there was no point in denying it any longer, he began to recount the horrifying events of that night. Investigators finally learned what had happened on April 13, 2013. By this time, Daniel Marsh had spent years consumed by dark fantasies of violence and decided it was time to act on them. That night, he dressed in black clothing, donned gloves and a ski mask, taped the soles of his shoes to prevent leaving traces, and armed himself with a large knife. Between 2 and 3 a.m. on April 14th, he set out into the quiet streets, intent on finding a target. Daniel walked past 40 to 50 houses, looking for an open door or window. In California, where many residents sleep with their windows open, he eventually found his opportunity. The home belonged to Oliver Northup, 87, and Claudia Maupin, 76, who lived just down the street from him. Using his knife, Daniel cut the screen of an open window and slipped inside. He found himself in the living room and waited, listening carefully until he heard the sound of snoring from the bedroom. Quietly making his way toward the noise, he discovered the couple asleep. Daniel had assumed he would only find one person, but realizing there were two did not deter him. For 10 long minutes, he stood over the sleeping couple, deliberating on how to execute his plan. He felt nervous, but also exhilarated. Suddenly, Claudia woke up and screamed. Without hesitation, Daniel stabbed her, unleashing a frenzied attack that continued for what seemed like an eternity. By the time he was done, he had stabbed Oliver and Claudia a total of 127 times. He continued to mutilate their bodies long after they were dead. The brutality did not end there. Daniel proceeded to desecrate the corpses, inserting a phone and a drinking glass into their bodies. Later, he confessed that this was an attempt to confuse the investigation, a tactic that had indeed delayed his capture for months. This chilling level of calculation and violence left investigators stunned and the community reeling in horror. Due to the severity of the crime, the prosecutor decided to try Daniel as an adult. The boy attempted to claim innocence, citing that he suffered from a mental disorder. However, a forensic psychiatric evaluation revealed that Daniel was not mentally ill. According to expert Matthew Logan, the 15-year-old boy was a psychopath, scoring 35.6 out of 40 on the corresponding checklist. For context, Ted Bundy scored 39 out of 40, and Aileen Wuornos scored 32. Before his arrest, Daniel was already looking for his next victim, wandering the streets with a baseball bat, as he wanted to commit his next crime in that way. The jury found him guilty of 2 first-degree murders. For each, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison, plus an additional 2 years for the particular cruelty of his crime. He will first be eligible for parole in June 2037. One might think the families of the victims could find solace, but a new law soon changed the situation. The law stipulated that only a judge could decide whether a juvenile could be tried as an adult. As a result, Daniel's case was reconsidered, and if the judge had disagreed with the prosecutor's decision, Daniel could have been released as early as age 25. Fortunately, the judge upheld the prosecutor's ruling. However, the surprises in the legal system did not end there. In September 2018, the governor of California signed a law prohibiting the trial of 14 and 15-year-olds as adults, regardless of the severity of their crimes. This meant that Daniel once again had the chance to be released, this time as early as May 2022. The victims' families launched a campaign to prevent Daniel's release. This is not a teenager who needs a second chance. This is a man who knew what he was doing and admitted he would do it again, declared Victoria Hurd, Claudia's daughter. Even in prison, he tattooed the images of my mother's wounds on his torso, she said indignantly. For several months, Claudia and Oliver's relatives anxiously awaited the decision on Daniel Marsh's appeal. To their relief, it was denied. The criminal will remain in prison and continue serving his sentence. Thus, a hero turned into a villain. This was the story of Claudia Maupin and Oliver Northup's deaths at the hands of an extraordinary killer, a 15-year-old boy who, just 4 years earlier, had saved a life instead of taking one.